Greetings from my kitchen studio in San Francisco, and welcome to BRC and Friends. It's a regular-ish 30-minute Google Hangout with me, Bruce Reyes-Chow, where I chat with friends and adventurers from around the interwebs. If you've missed the show, it's because 2015 has been packed with other things, but never fear, I'll be back in 2016 with Season 3. But for now, we squeezed it just in time, just under the bell, the one and only episode of Season 2. So today I welcome to the show two friends, colleagues, activists, writers, all-around good people. The first person we welcome is Khang. Kathy is currently the director of Campus Access Initiatives, multi-ethnic director for InterVarsity Christian Fellowship USA. That's a long business card. Before that, Kathy spent 10 years ministering to students at her alma mater, Northwestern University, first as a campus staff for the Asian American InterVarsity chapter, and then as the area director overseeing undergraduate ministry to more than 300 students. She's one of the authors of More Than Serving Tea, one-of-a-kind book exploring faith, gender, culture, and ethnic identity from the distinct perspective of Asian American Christian women. And she's spoken and lectured at countless InterVarsity chapters, conferences, and educational institutions. Kathy was also one of the activists, and this is how I first got to know her, behind the Asian American Open Letter to the Evangelical Church. Most importantly, Kathy loves Jesus and can't get through the week without coffee, yoga, nail polish, and laughter. She and her husband, Peter Chang, live in the north suburbs of Chicago and are honored to be the parents of Bethany, Corbin, and Elias. Welcome, Kathy. And my next guest is Laura Mariko Cheifetz. Laura is a double pastor's kid of Japanese and white Jewish descent, born in California, raised in Oregon and Washington. After stints in New York City, the Presbyterian United Nations office, and Chicago at McCormick Theological Seminary, and San Francisco at the Pastoral Internship, and then in Atlanta, the Forum for Theological Exploration. She now lives in Louisville and works as the Vice President of Church and Public Relations for the Presbyterian Publishing Corporation. She also co-edited a book named Church on Purpose and has written various articles and chapters for publication. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you.
All right, so before we jump in, please take a moment to check out all the links below. There's going to be many down there for you to check out, and then make sure you're getting ready to share the video. Please follow around, tweet along with us before, during, or after. B Reyes-Chow, LMCHEIFETZ, or Miss Kathy Khang, MSKATHYKHANG, and use the hashtag BRC and Friends. All right, so inspired by a conversation about the recent trial and conviction of Oklahoma police officer Daniel Holtzclaw. Last week, Kathy, Laura, and I were bantering about on Twitter about some things. And so we're going to be discussing some of that, and what inspired this show to fit this in this year. It was around the Asian American voice and perspective around some of this, and how he has been named or not named Asian American, what that means for us. And so the three of us are going to talk about that a bit. So, but we're going to jump right into the first segment. And as we talked about this show, the three of us were raising issues and questions. There are a lot of complexities about this. And so first thing I'd like to do is let's name a few of the I don't know if we want to call them disclaimers or just kind of here's what we're not trying to do or we are trying to do or things we don't want to forget. And Laura, I'm going to go to you first. What are some of the complexities about just having this conversation in the first place?
One of the complexities of having this conversation is that multiracial people tend to identify themselves in a lot of different ways, and so it's very complicated when I, as someone who's self-identified Asian American multiracial person, tries to do that for anyone else. So I think that's definitely a complexity.
Right. So us trying to tell him how he should identify or other, I mean, thank you, that's great. Kathy, do you have any, what are some other things that we need to think about?
I think it's difficult also that we are talking about the perpetrator and not the victims and the win and the importance of the conviction. But because the women were black women and targeted specifically because he believed nobody would believe them, that also adds another layer of complexity that this is happening in a time in a broader conversation about police brutality against black lives. And so it's very messy.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of what I love about our conversation on Twitter was just that I think we all kind of know that, and so how do we so the alternative is we just don't talk about it, right? Because it's too messy and let's not deal with it. But I think that us doing this will kind of add some layers of depth and texture to this. But I don't think any of us is trying to be the answer to any of this. The thing I want to lift up is, I think sometimes when Asian Americans step into these conversations, it can feel like, and I have this, like, we're not trying to compete for. It's not like this isn't the oppression Olympics. We're not trying to say this is more important than this or this is, but we hold all of these things together. And so if folks begin to challenge that, I think we acknowledge that we're not trying to say we need to talk about this more or less or whatever, but that this is part of the whole conversation. All right, so thank you all. I think that's helpful for us. So I'm going to go to you, Laura, with the first question around this. So we know that there were multiple sources, people. I did some just random searches for Holtzclaw white, Holtzclaw Asian on Twitter and other places, and there are quite a few folks that just named him as white. What? So I'm just going to say go. Go ahead and respond to that, Laura, because I think that's one of the things we talked about. What do you say about all of that happened?
I think there are a number of things going on, but I do think that when it comes to race in the United States, most of us default to a black-white binary, even though race in the U.S. has never been black and white, and that Asian Americans oftentimes are invisible. So our activism is invisible, our participation in social justice movements is invisible, even our crime rates and poverty rates are invisible. And that oftentimes we're also considered white until it's convenient to not consider us white, along with a legacy of colonialism and exploitation and how our labor has been treated and how we've been lumped into one group and we really don't necessarily belong in one group. So I think what is particularly complicated about this case is that we tend to get hung up on the race of a particular perpetrator, and while that's important, I think we also have to think about the larger framework of white supremacy. So when does it serve white supremacy for Asian Americans to be invisible? When does it serve white supremacy for a police officer to be called white? Or when does it serve white supremacy for him to not be white? There are definitely instances of police brutality in which the perpetrators were not white. So I think it's how do we look at the larger system that's in place and how we all play into it at different points, regardless of our intentions.
Right. Hey, if anybody needs a syllabus for a class, you just captured it right there, right? That'd be great. But Kathy, let me just ask the question that Laura just asked to you. How does it serve white supremacy to not name him as Asian or to call him white? What do you think that serves?
Well, there was a lot of coverage about the fact that there was an all-white jury in this case and whether or not an all-white jury was capable of convicting a police officer. And so it's convenient that he becomes white and that an all-white jury has finally convicted a white police officer of this severity of brutality against black women. And so it serves white supremacy in that it says, see, we can point out injustice in our own people and convict a police officer, but it's not actually that convenient because of his multiracial status.
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw some back and forth with people on Twitter around this. I saw him and I'm like, that dude's mixed.
Yeah.
Right? I don't want to say any Asian, but I think most Asians are looking and going, whoa.
Yeah.
That he's got something, right? Something's going on.
Right.
But I wonder, if do you think it's a genuine, people just don't know that, in some context of our country, that they were looking, I'm going, no, that's a white guy. And so what does that say about Asians? When I go somewhere, nobody ever perceives me as white. And so what's the complexity and the intricacies of that reality for other parts of our country? I live in San Francisco, so it's, we're in a bubble in which I choose and love. But you all are in different places. You're of different, So what do you think about that part? Who wants to go? I'll go to you, Laura. Go for it.
Okay. I think that we are not very good at phenotypically classifying people, and when we're working with, phenotype is how you look right?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I think because we are accustomed to putting people into racial categories based on phenotype, interpersonally speaking, not structurally speaking, that's not the legal way to do it, although that can be a stand-in for the legal way to do it, then people default to what they're familiar with. And I think, honestly, in a lot of parts of the country, people do not get a lot of exposure to multiracial people. And people in other parts of the country, like Seattle area, for instance, and most of California, there's a lot of exposure to people who are multiracial. And so our capacity as individuals to place people along whatever racial categories we're thinking of, it's very mixed, I guess, what would occur to us.
Yeah. Kathy, you have any?
Well, it's exposure, but it's also what is easiest. And so I do think that there's also a level of, like, you just don't want to sound stupid. And so, yeah, I would agree with you, Bruce. When I saw his picture, I was like, dude, how can you not know? Yeah. But also that's just exposure. Really in bigger all of America, people look at him and go, he's white. I have a hard time believing that's how people would automatically identify him.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and I wonder. I would love at some point. I haven't talked with any of my African American friends. Like, what is it around naming another person of color, and like that whole tension within the African American, Asian American communities around a lot of things, but that there's probably something going on there too. But I appreciate that. My kids go to schools here in the city where, like, there was one of my daughters in their yearbook, their three best friends, they won the three best friends thing, and all of them were half white, half Filipino. And so it's like, that is such a unique context in which we live. It's just an interesting kind of place. All right, let's move on. So, Kathy, you tweeted out on December 10th, your tweets are being quoted now, "Dear Asian Americans, Daniel Holtzclaw is biracial. What does this mean that he is considered white? What are we avoiding?" Unpack that. What was that about? What did you mean? What were you asking?
Sure. Well, I was asking a lot of things in 140 characters, and part of it is, as an Asian American, we don't want. I'm not excited that he's an Asian American, right? I mean, it's not like, I want to identify with that, right? Let's just be honest. So it's convenient that for me and for the white community that he's labeled as white. But as an Asian American, that also challenges and forces the conversation about being model minority. Are we honorary white? What does it mean that a dominant white media, and even on Twitter, which is not always reflecting white media, that he is identified as white? And where are Asian Americans who are going to step in the more complex conversations about race and identity? And what are the conversations that could or should happen between Asian Americans, multiracial, and the Black community when we're talking about police brutality and how these things play out in the media? So that's what I was trying to get at.
Did you get much pushback, or did people challenge you on that tweet at all, or what have been your interactions? Because you were pretty active during all of this.
Yeah, and so strangely enough, not a whole lot of pushback. It was more of like, oh, he's not white. And I tried to get the attention of some of the more prominent Black Twitter folk, and no one kind of jumped in on that conversation. And so I don't know if, obviously it was a big news cycle on Twitter, and the fact that major media outlets were not covering it immediately. So I actually didn't get any pushback, which I was actually surprised. I was kind of hoping for some, like, what do you mean by that, and all that kind of stuff. And so then I don't know how to read. I don't know how to take that from Asian American followers who saw that tweet.
Yeah. That's it. I know that there were some folks. I saw somebody respond to you that said, "Hey, let's give the jury some credit." There was I thought that was really interesting, kind of exchange. And I saw a cartoon this past week that had archetypes of shooters in the U.S. and one was the black shooter means you're in a gang, the Muslim shooter means you're this, the da-da, and I tweeted, I said, I wonder if there's an Asian American archetype for mass killers, and that whole, when you started, it's like, it's not that I'm glad that we have them, like I'm not trying to, but it's interesting that somebody tweeted back and said, you know, I've only heard of one. And I'm like, that's interesting in itself because there have been many and disproportionately represented. And so an interesting, you know, how do we claim some of that? And it's not as like, we're not proud of it in any way, but what does it say back to us? Laura, what do you think about this whole, you know, how does the Asian American community deal with all of this for our own folks?
I think that we have a lot of shame in general about everything. But I think in particular when one of our, let's be honest, when one of our community members is engaging in behaviors that are shameful, that are sinful, that are not anything that anyone would want to be associated with, then we're a lot less likely to be like, oh, one of our own has done this, right? And I think that's happened with mass shooters, that's happened with rapists. No one wants a family to raise someone who's going to be a serial rapist. And I think because we're very communal also, then we know that we need to take responsibility, but it's too embarrassing, and we don't know how to do it. I don't know that we have the skills to do this publicly.
Yeah. Response to that? I mean, I think that's great. Kathy?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, it's not like we want him in our tribe necessarily, but because of the silence, I think that's why I tweeted, was how can we not at least acknowledge the trick there, right? Like, our identity is erased, and then we don't have to take responsibility for that. How convenient for us. So, you know, would it have been different had he been identified as multiracial? Had that identity been made clear, would the response have been different? But because it was erased by others, for whatever reasons, I think because it maintains white supremacy and it's convenient in a binary, then we don't have to speak up. And I think that's part of we're not off the hook, people. We're not off the hook. And if anything, this adds a level of complexity that we already live in. That's the trick. I mean, we already live in this space. So shame, no shame, it's out there. And I think I'd rather have people talking about that and practicing articulating the complexity of that existence.
So, Kathy, I'm going to stay with you for a minute. So, you get to sit in a room of patriarchs and matriarchs of the Asian American community, because I'm sure we could get them all in a room. What do you tell us? What do you say? Okay, here's the reality around race today. Around what would your kind of thing, your challenge for us be at this moment? To actually, what do we do?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be so much the matriarchs and the patriarchs. It's kind of the younger generation, and particularly the ones I work with, the evangelical Asian American Christians, to say, like, you're not white, right? Like, you're not white.
The fact that you have to ask that question,
yes, says a lot.
Right?
It says a lot.
I've been with Asians, and I've asked their ethnic identity, and they've said I'm white, and it tears my soul. But I also you understand.
Right. Right.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. No, I get it, but I think that's the reminder and the question I would pose, and then to kind of unpack that, because we're white when it's convenient for white supremacy, and I think this is a great example of it. But in the end, it doesn't get us off the hook, because at some point someone's going to go, I don't think he's really white.
Yeah.
He's not really one of us.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And it's also very complicated. Laura had mentioned this earlier. It's one thing for someone who is multiracial to self-identify one way or another. And so that's the complexity of a communal culture, and whether or not you are a part or you identify, do we have the right to identify you as part of our group?
Right. Thank you.
I would say, yeah. Yep, go ahead.
Laura, to you, what do we do? What's you get to give, here's your 3 to-dos, Asian American community, go.
Asian Americans, we need to learn our own history and our own histories that have intersected with the histories of other people of color, because there is a lot of solidarity that's happened and a lot of solidarity to come. The other thing is to step up, and even though people don't always show up for our issues, we need to show up for the issues of other people. They're not going to show up unless we show up first. And the last thing is to not settle for any easy answers or any easy opt-outs. We live here. This is our country. It's hard. Suck it up.
I like that one. Suck
it up. I'm going to name the episode that.
Suck it up. Asian America, suck it up.
Suck it up. Clickbait. Clickbait. Thank you, Laura. All right, so these things go quickly, but I want to end with a question for the two of you. I've known you in different contexts over the years now, and I've always found you both to sit in all the crap of the world really well, but not feel like it overwhelms or creates despair. So as you're thinking about young activists, young folk, whoever, just in general, what do you do to keep fed spiritually, mentally, physically? I mean, what would you offer really briefly to those who are engaged in this work and how they don't burn out or get jaded around some of this stuff? Let's go to you, Laura.
I feel free to keep my friends the people I really need to be my friends. So I have obligation acquaintances and people that I, am in relationship with, and then I have the people that I'm really safe with, and that's kind of how I keep my sanity, right, whether they're Christian or not.
Right. And let me ask, so as you do that, that's an intentional choice that you make, right? I mean, those are kind of, you don't have a written list, maybe you do, I don't know, but you're not like, but you are actually thinking about, these are people that I trust kind of with my soul. Mm-hmm. And these are folks that I like, but these aren't. So, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Kathy, what about you?
I take care of myself. So I make sure that time for me is a priority. And if that means I need to stay off of Twitter and put my phone away, and sometimes my friends and family need to pull it away from me, then that's what it takes. Because I think that there's a lot that goes on the interwebs that can be very destructive to your soul. So interact with real people that you like.
Yeah, I agree. And I would echo that. I mean, I think, the core people who you trust and will hold you accountable and mm-hmm. don't feel like they're your mom, like, right? I mean,
right.
Right. Yeah, I think are great. So thank you all for that. So last question for you. We'll go to you, Kathy, in a minute. Shout out to an organization or a person that we want to, that maybe is known and we want more people to know, or somebody up and coming. Just are there organizations or anyone that you really want us to know about? Actually, let me go to Laura first on that one. Laura, who do we want to lift up? You have anyone?
I have a couple of things. I have a book that we have coming out called Race in a Post-Obama America that's meant for churches, and I think that could be really helpful for people who want to figure out how to talk about race and racism in their churches. Right. And then I also want to shout out to Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training, that they're one of many organizations doing a really good job with different communities and different organizations, helping people gain a vocabulary that could be helpful and think about how to dismantle the structures of white supremacy.
Awesome. Is that where you got that big word earlier?
Which
Philo?
One?
Which big word?
Phenotype.
Phenotype. You're so smart. College.
Ouch.
Sorry. Ouch. I'm a horrible person.
I'm going to Kathy now. She might be nicer, but who knows?
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Kathy, do you any organizations or people you want to shout out to?
Yeah, I have a good friend named Leroy Barber who's doing some great work with something called the Voices Project, and it was created initially to raise up a generation of Black leaders, but he's now expanding to leaders of color and working with their speaking skills as well as kind of self-care and vitalization, as well as a camaraderie, a group of folks who can journey together. So that's another reason, or another thing that keeps, I think, all of us going, is that we have also like real life friends and internet friends,
Mhm.
right? Virtual friends to kind of
Yeah.
keep us going.
Great, great, awesome. So I will make sure I include links to all of that
Yep.
at the end of the show. All right, so that's it. We're done. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of BRC and Friends. Thanks again, Laura and Kathy, for being here. Thank you for hanging out. You all are fonts of wisdom. Be sure to check out the episode recap on Reyes-Chow.com, where I'll include all the links mentioned today during today's episode. Also, take a moment to subscribe to the YouTube channel that will have all these shows on, and then being able to share. You can share the episode here if you click right on there. And then if you want to support what's going on in 2016, I'm on Patreon now, and so you can become a patron and support Season 3 of that, and you'll be able to see that link right there. So that's it. Until Season 3, 2016 on BRC and Friends, please keep talking because there are times when silence is not an option. See you later.